The clock, on Daniel Harper's nightstand, glowed 2:03 a.m. The rest of the neighborhood was drowned in an eerie, midnight silence, broken only by the distant rustle of tree branches scraping against each other in the wind. He had been in that half-conscious state between sleep and wakefulness, when a sudden, urgent knock jolted him upright. At first, he thought he might have imagined it, perhaps just a branch hitting the siding. But then it came again. 3 sharp, deliberate knocks. Not hurried, not tentative, like whoever was out there knew exactly what they were doing. Daniel's heart thudded in his chest. He lived on the outskirts of town, in a modest 2-story home that was far from any late-night foot traffic. Visitors at this hour? Impossible. And definitely not welcome. His first thought was for Emma. His little girl was sleeping soundly in her room down the hall, her stuffed bunny clutched in her small arms. She had been through enough in her young life. Losing her mother when she was only 3 had left Daniel fiercely protective. He wouldn't let anyone or anything harm her. He slipped quietly out of bed, throwing on his robe. The wind rattled the windows as he moved through the dimly lit hallway, the wooden floor creaking under his feet. As he approached the front door, the porch light's faint glow revealed a shadow on the other side of the frosted glass panel. Another knock, slower this time. Daniel's mind raced. Who would be standing outside in the middle of a cold, stormy night? Was it trouble? Someone lost? Or worse, someone dangerous? He glanced toward the umbrella stand in the door and pulled out the old wooden baseball bat he kept there, just in case. Taking a deep breath, he turned the lock and slowly opened the door. The sight before him made him freeze. A young woman stood there, drenched from head to toe, her rain-soaked hair plastered to her cheeks. Her coat hung loosely from her shoulders, ripped along one sleeve. The rainwater dripped from her fingertips, pooling at her feet. Her skin was pale, almost ghostly under the yellow porch light, but her eyes, those deep, searching eyes, locked on his with an intensity that sent a shiver down his spine. For a moment she didn't speak. She just stood there, breathing heavily, as though she had been running. Her lips trembled, not just from the cold, but from something deeper: fear, desperation. "Can I help you?" Daniel asked, his voice steady but cautious. Her gaze swept over his face, as if studying every line, every feature. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, she said, "You feel familiar." Daniel blinked, unsure if he had heard her correctly. Familiar? What did that even mean? Before he could respond, a sudden gust of wind swept across the porch, and the woman shivered violently. Without thinking, Daniel stepped aside and gestured for her to come in. The storm outside was growing worse. Lightning flashed in the distance, followed by the deep rumble of thunder. She hesitated for a split second before stepping inside, leaving a trail of wet footprints on the hardwood floor. Daniel shut the door behind her, locking it, his eyes never leaving her face. Emma's small voice suddenly came from the top of the stairs. "Daddy, who's that?" Daniel turned to see his daughter standing there in her pink pajamas, rubbing her sleepy eyes, her bunny dangling from one hand. The woman looked up at Emma, and for a brief moment, something unreadable crossed her face, a flicker of emotion that Daniel couldn't place. She seemed almost pained. "It's all right, sweetheart," Daniel said softly. "Go back to bed. I'll explain later." Emma nodded, though her curious eyes lingered on the stranger before she disappeared back into her room. Daniel grabbed a clean towel from the hall closet and handed it to the woman. She took it wordlessly, her hands trembling as she clutched it to her chest. "Sit by the fire," he said, nodding toward the living room. "You're freezing." She moved slowly, as if each step took effort. Daniel followed her into the room, the warm glow of the fireplace casting flickering shadows on the walls. He still didn't know who she was, what she wanted, or why she had come here in the middle of the night. But one thing was certain: the look in her eyes when she said those strange words wasn't something he was going to forget anytime soon. The fire crackled softly, its golden light licking the edges of the room, chasing away the chill that clung stubbornly to the air. The young woman sat on the edge of the couch, towel wrapped tightly around her shoulders. Steam rose faintly from her wet hair, and her eyes, those intense, searching eyes, followed the flames like they might hold the answers to something she desperately needed to know. Daniel stayed a few feet away, standing near the mantel with his arms crossed. He wanted to demand answers immediately. Who she was, why she had shown up at his home at this ungodly hour. But there was something fragile about her, like if he pressed too hard, she might shatter. He decided to start simple. "Do you want something warm to drink? Tea? Coffee?" She glanced at him briefly, her lips parting as though she was about to speak. But instead she gave a small nod. Daniel moved into the kitchen, keeping one ear trained on her in case she tried to leave, or worse, in case something unexpected happened. As he waited for the kettle to whistle, he couldn't help glancing toward the hallway, where Emma's bedroom door was shut. She was safe, for now, but he needed to know who this woman was, before he could relax. When he returned, he handed her a steaming mug of chamomile tea. Her cold fingers brushed against his as she took it, sending an oddly sharp jolt through him, like static electricity, only deeper, warmer. She noticed it too. Her eyes lifted to his, and for a heartbeat, the air between them felt charged. "What's your name?" Daniel asked, his tone calm but firm. She hesitated. "Lena." "Lena," he repeated slowly, as if tasting the sound of it. "And what brings you to my doorstep at 2 in the morning?" Lena lowered her gaze to the tea. Her thumb traced the rim of the mug, in slow circles. "I didn't know where else to go," she said finally. "That's not an answer," Daniel said, his voice tightening. "You show up here in the middle of a storm, tell me I feel familiar, and expect me not to ask questions." Her shoulders tensed. "I didn't mean to scare you," she said softly. I needed to see you, to make sure you were real." Daniel's brows knitted together. "Make sure I was real? What are you talking about? Have we met before?" She looked up at him, and her voice trembled. "No. And yes." The contradiction made him frown. "That doesn't make sense." Her lips pressed into a thin line, as though she was wrestling with whether to say more. Outside, the wind howled, rattling the windows. A clap of thunder shook the walls, and for a moment, the two of them simply stared at each other, the room charged with an unspoken tension. Finally, Lena set the mug down on the coffee table. "You look exactly like someone I used to know," she said. "Someone important to me." Daniel tried to keep his voice steady. "And who was that?" She shook her head. "It's not that simple. I can't explain it right now." 1,000 questions burned in his mind. Was this some kind of scam? Was she mentally unstable? Or was she telling the truth about something he didn't yet understand? But her voice carried such sincerity that he found it hard to dismiss her entirely. "You should get some rest," Daniel said finally. "It's late, and you're obviously exhausted." Lena nodded slightly, though her eyes never left his. "I won't stay long. I just need a little time." He fetched a blanket from the linen closet and handed it to her. She took it wordlessly, wrapping herself in its warmth, her gaze flickering back to the flames. Daniel lingered in the doorway for a moment, still watching her. Something about the way she sat there alone, vulnerable, yet carrying an air of quiet strength, pulled at him in a way he couldn't quite name. But deep down, in a place he didn't want to admit existed, he felt it too. That strange sense of familiarity. The storm outside had quieted by morning, but the atmosphere inside Daniel's home was anything but calm. The rain had left a pearly mist clinging to the windows, casting the living room in a soft grey light. Daniel had barely slept. He'd sat in the armchair half the night, pretending to read a book, but really just watching the woman curled up on his couch. Lena had fallen asleep with the blanket pulled tightly to her chin, her dark hair spilling across the pillow. Every now and then, she'd mumble something in her sleep. A name, maybe, or a fragment of a sentence. But the words were too soft for him to make out. When Emma padded sleepily into the room, clutching her favorite stuffed bunny, Daniel put a finger to his lips. His daughter's eyes went wide at the sight of the stranger. "Daddy!" "Who's that?" Emma whispered. "A friend," Daniel said cautiously. "She's just here for a little while." Lena stirred at the sound of their voices, blinking awake. Her gaze fell on Emma, and something unreadable passed across her face. Something between surprise and tenderness. "You have a daughter," Lena said softly. Sitting up, Daniel nodded. "Emma, this is Lena. Lena, this is Emma." Emma gave a small, shy wave, then retreated toward the kitchen, sensing the unspoken tension between the adults. Daniel waited until his daughter was out of earshot, before speaking again. "All right. Enough mystery. Last night you said I feel familiar. Now I want to know exactly what you meant." Lena took a deep breath. Her eyes locked on his. "Because I've seen you before. Not in person, at least." "I don't think so. But in old photographs. Photographs my mother kept hidden." That caught Daniel off guard. "Photographs? Of me?" Lena nodded. "When I was a child, my mother had a small box of keepsakes. She wouldn't let me touch it. But one day, I did. Inside, there were letters, a few Polaroids, and a picture of you. You were younger, but I'd recognize your face anywhere." Daniel felt the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. "And why would your mother have pictures of me? That's what I never understood," Lena said, her voice trembling slightly. "Whenever I asked, she'd shut me down. She'd get this faraway look in her eyes and change the subject. But there was always something in the way she said your name." "My name?" Daniel's pulse quickened. "So she did tell you who I was?" "Only once," Lena admitted. "She said your name was Daniel, and that you were someone she could never forget." Daniel's mind was spinning. He didn't remember meeting anyone who fit this story. "What was your mother's name?" Lena hesitated, then said, "Clara. Clara Evans." The name didn't immediately click, but there was something faintly familiar about it, like a song lyric he couldn't quite place. He tried to dredge up the memory, but it remained just out of reach. "I don't know her," Daniel said carefully, though doubt had already begun to creep into his voice. Lena studied him, her eyes narrowing slightly, as if searching his expression for any trace of recognition. "Maybe you don't remember. Maybe you've blocked it out. But I'm telling you, Daniel, there's a reason I found you, and it's not just coincidence." Her conviction unsettled him. She didn't sound like someone spinning a story. She sounded like someone chasing a truth that had been buried for years. Emma's laughter suddenly rang from the kitchen, breaking the tension. Daniel turned his head toward the sound, his protective instincts kicking in. When he looked back, Lena's expression had softened again. "I didn't come here to cause trouble," she said. "But I need answers, as much as you do. And I think you're the only one who can give them to me." Outside, the mist began to lift, revealing a pale morning sky. But inside Daniel's home, the fog of uncertainty only seemed to grow thicker. The next few days were a strange blend of normalcy and tension. Lena stayed in the small guest room, helping with breakfast, playing with Emma, and quietly avoiding questions she didn't seem ready to answer. Daniel kept telling himself she was just a stranger who had appeared at his door, but every time he caught her watching him with that searching look in her eyes, he felt a tug somewhere deep inside. By Thursday morning, Daniel decided he couldn't keep circling around the truth. He asked Emma to play in her room, then found Lena in the living room, sitting by the window with a cup of tea. "We can't keep dancing around this," he said, sitting across from her. "You've been hinting that there's some kind of connection between us. I need to know what you think it is." Lena stared into her cup for a long moment before speaking. "I think you knew my mother in a way that mattered, more than you realize. And I think that's why I recognized you the second you opened the door." Daniel folded his arms. "We already went over this. I don't remember anyone named Clara Evans." "Then maybe this will help," she said, reaching into her bag. She pulled out a faded photograph and slid it across the table. Daniel picked it up and froze. The picture was old, taken decades ago. There he was, 20-something, standing next to a young woman with bright eyes and a shy smile. His arm was draped around her shoulders in a way that felt intimate. The air left his lungs. "Yeah." He swallowed hard. "This is me." Lena nodded. "And that's my mother." The memory began to trickle back in pieces. A music festival, a rainy night, A warm laugh in a small diner. Clara had been visiting the city for just a week, but they'd spent almost every night together. He remembered thinking there was something different about her, something untouchable. Then one morning, she was gone. No note, no goodbye. Daniel's voice was hoarse. She never told me she was pregnant. Lena's eyes glistened, but her tone stayed calm. She didn't want to disrupt your life. She raised me alone. But before she died, she told me I should find you, that you had a right to know. The words hit Daniel like a wave. All the late nights working to provide for Emma. All the times he'd told himself he was doing his best as a father. Now there was a possibility he'd missed out on years with another child. He rubbed his temples. Why come now? Why not sooner? I tried, Lena said, her voice trembling. I searched, but I couldn't find you. It wasn't until last month that I saw an old news article about your woodworking shop. I recognized you instantly, and then I couldn't stop thinking about it. About you. Silence stretched between them, filled only by the faint ticking of the wall clock. Daniel's mind was a storm: shock, guilt, disbelief, and something else he couldn't quite name. Finally, he spoke. If what you're saying is true, then you're my daughter. Lena's lips curved into the faintest, most uncertain smile. Half-sister to Emma, she said softly. If you'll have me. Daniel exhaled slowly, his chest tight. Family isn't something I turn away, but this changes everything. Just then, Emma peeked into the room, her small voice breaking the heavy air. Daddy, is Lena staying for dinner? Daniel looked at Lena. She looked back, her eyes searching his face for an answer, and in that moment he knew there was no going back. Only forward into a future he hadn't expected, with a bond he was only beginning to understand.